This Global Malaysia Series is brought to you by the Economic Transformation Program, or the ETP. And the topic for our discussion this morning is retail beyond Malaysian shores. I'm Noelle, and I'll be the moderator for the panel this morning. The retail and wholesale sector is a very key area in the country. It is the fourth biggest contributor to the government's key economic areas that they have identified, which Pemandu has identified. And it contributed 114 billion ringgit to the GNI in 2011, up from about 100 billion ringgit in 2010. So these are very robust numbers, and obviously driven by domestic consumption. Now the question is, we have a very vibrant retail sector, but the bigger question is, how many international Malaysian brands do we have out there? So I think this is the question we hope to address in the panel. How can we push out more Malaysian brands overseas? And why is that important? I suppose from one is from trade perspective, and it's also about just getting the Malaysian name out there. The first question I want to start off with is, let's take a look at the local market right now, because this is really your primary market. And the retail scene has developed so tremendously. It's really maturing very quickly in Malaysia. And one of the things is that a lot of Western brands have come in, a lot of Western luxury brands and mass luxury brands, if there's such a term. I think they're called prestige brands. So how are you positioning yourself in relation to these brands? Maybe Tien Yue, you can start.
I think we feel brand positioning is very important, and we are quite lucky. Like Noelle said, the brand started, or the company started 128 years ago. And I think it's quite rare to have an Asian brand with a long heritage in craftsmanship. My great-grandfather was making things in pewter. Today, 128 years later, we're making things in pewter. So there's a long history, and that's a great foundation as a starting point. So as part of the whole brand positioning, I think that's one key advantage we have. Beyond that, it's then differentiating yourself, and I think we feel that we own this category. If you were to go into any market around the world where we felt that we prioritize it as a market, we will want to own pewter as a category in that market. So ultimately, we have to make sure that the category that we own is still relevant, and that's where the design innovation comes in. We need to make sure that with this authentic 128-year-old history, we are innovating from a design point of view today to make this material and the product categories that we create relevant to today's consumer. So I think from a brand positioning, very clear that we have a point of differentiation. We're working with an unusual material, we own it, we have a long heritage of craftsmanship in it, and we are doing the design innovation today to make that a relevant offering to consumers. So for us, we feel that the brand positioning is very unique, and therefore it's something that we can focus on, and that gives us a strong competitive edge.
Rhoda, British India, if I were to draw a comparison, one brand name, one Western brand name that comes to mind would be Ralph Lauren. It's really about a lifestyle concept that you're trying to promote. Is that a fair assessment?
We are definitely a lifestyle brand, and I think in relation to how we position ourselves in a crowded marketplace out there is our ability to define, say, we have a good story. It's a compelling story. It is one that marries the best of the East and the West. And with the current Asian transformation, I think this becomes more and more relevant in terms of the story. Right. Additionally, if you think about how many tropical countries are there out there in the world, take a guess. I think it's around 160, 170. And you think about how many premium tropical brands producing apparel for our climate, right? That is of high quality, easy to wear, elegant yet comfortable. So that's how we position ourselves in terms of the competitive market. And at the end of the day, if we are true to our story and we are true to what we want to deliver to our customers, we compete effectively. It's about being able to tell a compelling story to the people that you want to bring on board, firstly. Secondly, I think there is no easy answer. If you think about just because the size of our population is small, that is the root cause of not finding talent. The other thing is the perception of the retail industry as on the hierarchy of professions to choose from. It's on the lower tiers.
Because it's a hard business, or salaries don't justify the kind of time you have to put in?
So it's a combination of a couple of factors, right? Partly is because if you think of from the salary base, you say in the States, if you were to do like something like what they call a sin industry, like casino, you get paid maybe 20 to 30% more because of the stigma. And 30% is not a game changer. But their overhead bases are more or less the same across like their retail industries versus a casino. In Malaysia, for Malaysian brands, retail brands in particular, if I compare like British India to Petronas, it's not even a close comparison, right? So of course that salary base becomes an issue. However, then you have to start finding like, what about passion, right? And then that's where you want to try and find and attract people from that aspect. But again, no easy answer. It continues to be a challenge for us.
I think talent's a major issue. It's one of the biggest constraints of growth. If you want to go and open new markets, you want to have people that you can send out there and represent the brand. You know, you want to know that you have guys who know the brand values and are going to execute well when they go and open a new market. So for us, talent's one of the biggest constraints of how quickly we can grow. What can you do about it? I think the first thing is we feel that it's a great opportunity for Malaysian talent to go outside. If you have a Malaysian brand that's going and opening new markets, you have fantastic opportunities to send Malaysians out there, whether it's on a permanent basis, on a part-time basis, to build a new market. And entrepreneurial Malaysians, I think, will be attracted to these opportunities. So if they like the idea of going and building something new, then I think whether the pay is not quite the size of a billion-dollar company, I think we can offer something else different. But the stigma is there. There aren't enough people thinking about careers in retail, in careers in design, product design. I think Malaysia has a lot of graduates who've come out of fashion, graphics, interior, but product design is something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. And I think that's going to be an issue because our design team basically is fully Malaysian and fully groomed, I think, from their early days. There's no opportunity to get in senior hires who have deep product design expertise. So it's a bit of a long cultivating process, but that's the approach that we are taking. But I think fantastic opportunities, and as more Malaysian brands go out, people who are attracted to entrepreneurial opportunities like that, I think will see the trade-off between that and perhaps pay.
Let's talk about now going abroad. You've got your local market, and now you're moving abroad. And Royal Selangor is in the US, UK, Middle East, China. China is a market that you're very keen on, and also you have 2 stores in Jakarta. And British India in Singapore, Thailand, and the Philippines. So what are some problems you face trying to expand abroad? Presumably getting prime space would be one.
I'll start. I think for us, the first challenge is that the markets are different. If you go to our Royal Selangor retail store in China, we sell a lot of our tea-related items, teapots, tea caddies, because the luxury consumer there is willing to spend a lot on tea. So if they're willing to spend a lot on tea, they're willing to spend on nice tea accessories. And then if you go to our Australian business, then they sell wine accessories because they drink a lot of wine. You're willing to spend on wine, you're willing to spend nice wine accessories. So the challenge is to try to figure out what is the product category that's going to drive your business in each of these markets. And there's going to be a consistent offering in terms of that core, but there will be a certain emphasis on different product categories depending on the market we go on. So the challenge for us is to figure out, one, what is the product category that's required for that market that will really drive the business, and two, then to decide whether that market is a priority, because certain markets will be a challenge and a taxing stress on our product development team because it requires constant new product development specifically for those markets. So we have to make conscious decisions on whether we have that capacity to handle these additional loads on product development. So I think the first major challenge is figuring out what fits the lifestyle of the consumer in that market for our business. Beyond that, then there's a lot of execution challenges.
Yourself, Rhoda?
I think for us, it's more about finding the right people to work with in different countries. At the end, the thing is, we're not short of offers. We do get a lot of requests from pretty exotic locations to Scandinavian countries, to Fiji. But then it is very flattering, but it's important, despite the factory, we still have to be very focused in what we want to prioritize.
Build up his own team. But I think by having some members from head office, from home market, join that team, I think it adds something to the whole thing. But just want to add something on the challenge in finding distributors in other markets. You know, it's back to the strength of the brand. You know, if there are brands which are so strong globally, they just haven't come to Malaysia until 5 years ago, then of course you'll get a whole ton of distributors lining up to sign up that brand. Now, in our case, I'm the first to recognize that in many markets, Royal Selangor is not a recognized brand. And the distributor that we are looking for is someone who will help us build that brand in that market. You know, because we're not looking for the guy who's going to come milk it for 3 years or 5 years and then move on to the next brand. We're looking for somebody who's going to invest long-term in building up that brand. And some markets, that's a long slog. You know, we went into India last year. We opened 2 stores in India with our distributor there. And I tell you, India, nobody knows what Royal Selangor is. Nobody knows what pewter is.
Market's a very gold market.
Silver, gold, pewter is not something they're familiar with. When we had tourists come to our visitor center here, you know, which is a big source of our market intel on people around the world, what would they like? Then they come to our visitor center in KL. You know, we had a tour that went through, and at the end of it, they said, "So where do you make your computers?" So they had no idea what pewter is. They were just completely confused by the whole thing.
Where are your computers?
And so I don't think it is easy to go into a market and try to build a brand if they don't understand what the material is. So if you're looking for distributors who like the story, who understand the potential, then we work with them in the long term to build up the brand. And that is a lot more difficult than finding someone who's going to milk the strength of a global brand in Malaysia, because, you know, half the Malaysians already know it.
One of the things is that Malaysia is not a cultural or economic powerhouse. As a result of that, do you find that it doesn't give you the extra lever to sell your brand? It's unlike like Japan, where people generally like Japan, right? Anything that's Japanese. So when even a fairly unknown Japanese brand were to approach a foreign property owner, mall owner, and chances are he might get a second or third conversation. Do you find that's a problem for you as well?
If you think about what makes a good brand, it is not where the brand is from. There are certain elements that are universal as to what makes a good brand. First and foremost, the product has to be of a good quality. Secondly, it has to be unique. Thirdly, does it have mystique? Like, where is the inspiration coming from, right? So if brands have those 3 elements and they are able to tell a compelling story, then the country of origin no longer matters.
But I think you're right. Right now, we have a country branding issue. It is no positive to say that you are a brand from Malaysia in a global consumer's mind. And that's not surprising, because they haven't been exposed to a lot of Malaysian brands, right? So if they don't get exposed to it, how else are they going to form an opinion on what a Malaysian brand should be like in terms of quality or creativity? So I think that there's some country branding issues, and that will only change when we have a critical mass of Malaysian brands who are out there building a bit more of a name for Malaysia out there. So at the moment, if there's no positive, it's not something that that we use in a big way. But in our case, because there's a heritage story and we have to tell the heritage story, it's quite evident as soon as a person wants to know a bit more about the history of Royal Selangor that it is a Malaysian brand. So I think we do not hide it, but it would be much better if the country branding was something that supported the whole story. In the case of Japan or Germany or Switzerland, I think these are big positives of the brands coming up.
One of the strategies that Malaysian retailers are now doing, Bonia, for example, they are going abroad and they're setting up a studio in Europe, I suppose, to to harness designs and to sort of establish some sort of credibility. And even I think the NASA Group family, I think they also have a fashion label abroad. It's not here in Malaysia, it's abroad. And so is that a strategy you see could be something you employ, like having a studio abroad just to give yourself some cachet?
In our case, I think the opportunity is here in Asia. I don't think we're trying to position ourselves as European designs. I think there's a lot of design inspiration in Asian culture. A lot of our collections tell a story, and I think Asia is very rich in design inspiration. So we see the future of design coming from this part of the world, and I think there's a hunger for it. In the past, and maybe to some extent now in some populations, there is this sort of, oh, if it's a brand from Europe or from the US, it must be better because, Asian brands, what have they done? So I think that stigma is disappearing because there's now a hunger for saying, what can Asia offer from a creative point of view? Recently, we worked with a Chinese designer in Shanghai. His name is Jamie Young. We just launched it a couple of weeks ago. He has won numerous international design awards. And there's so much interest in him by the Chinese media because he is one of very few Chinese designers who have been able to have credibility on an international stage. So I think that interest from the media really shows that hunger, that interest in saying, what can Asia offer? China should not be only the factory for the world, but a source of creative output. And as that continues and people appreciate that Asian design and Asian brands are something to be proud of, I think that would start flipping, that the design centers will be hopefully in Kuala Lumpur, but perhaps sooner in Singapore or Shanghai. And I think this part of the world will then be able to tap the talent pool that right now doesn't have an opportunity.
One of the things about expanding abroad, it's very expensive to do retail, obviously, but the B2B business, I think Royal Selangor is quite big on the B2B, like you've done work for LVMH, Dom Perignon, even Manchester United, or the label pins, yeah. So is that one way to buffer your growth there?
No, there's no way you can build a B2B business if you don't have retail presence. It doesn't work. If you want to build a brand, you're not a credible brand if you don't have a retail shop, or if you have another form of distribution like department store concessions, that's fine. But you need to have retail presence. No, consumers need to see your brand. Otherwise, there's no reason for companies to buy your product. So the way for us to get into a market is we must have retail presence, and then we can then get better growth supported by corporate sales, B2B.
Well, at this point, I would like to invite Mr. Ravindran Devagunam. He's the Director of Retail and Wholesale, NKEA, and I suppose he could give some of the government's perspective and what the government could do, or we'll also be interested to get your feedback on how else the government can help us. We've talked a lot about moving abroad. Ravi, why are there so few international Malaysian brands out there that's really globally recognized?
My team and I have always been, arguing or trying to contemplate, why is it we don't have the homegrown Malaysian brands? Where are they, right? How can we actually help them? So what we've decided now is, following this series, we'd like to have a series of dialogue, right? One of the things that we are thinking about is to segment the various brands and maybe come up with 2 clusters, right? I don't think it's trying to be too ambitious and going for a large number of these brands, but maybe 3 to 5 major brands like Royal Selangor, like BritishIndia, maybe 1 or 2 more, and then maybe another cluster which is slightly lower, right? And try and chart out where they can be over the next 2.5 years. Then maybe it's time to just engage the existing brands, right? Rather than create something new. Right? Engage the existing brands and see how we can help them. For example, as you said, that it's not been easy accessing through our embassies. Maybe there's a way we can rebuild the Matre, Metis, the actual embassy staff actually have a retailer, associated with certain countries, right? based in the embassy that our retailers can actually approach and access. Maybe build that network, one. Two, possibility of having kind of like a venture fund, right? Although I know you're not keen on giving up your equity at this point.
It's not mine to give. I think one of the things that, as I hear the conversations go, one of the items that perhaps is not called out upon is before we expand, before we want to run, let's know how to walk. Are we confident that we can execute world-class standard within Malaysia? Because when you go beyond that, whatever works now may work overseas, but whatever you have issues with will be propagated across, right? So a lot, same with the malls, same with retail brands. I think that is something which is a given. So when you say that proposals perhaps were not up to scratch, then it's more a reflection of the capabilities of our current industry, of what we are able to execute and achieve.
If both of you were to sit in this lab where Ravi is going to create, where talk to some of the brands that have already evolved slightly, what would you, I wouldn't say ask for, but what would you suggest to, say, Ravi and his team?
So if you think about the race to the finish line and you have various players at different parts of the race, I would urge for you to focus on those closer to the finish line. That's not because that will get you the bang for the buck. For those brands that will get past the finish line, they can be your case stories and inspiration to those who are still in the race and kind of bring them on board. And that's the kind of an organic growth of acceleration. I think like there are a lot of things like, say, leveling, say, our overhead constraints, right? Our base is small. What are the things that we retailers need to spend on to kind of grow and develop our brand? Things like information technology, those are very expensive. Intellectual property rights, right? Protection of that worldwide, extremely expensive too. And at the same time, also talent remains an issue. So if you think about, like say for example, I'm going to say Singapore, because they do, what I understand, they do have incentives for some of those elements to kind of assist their brands to grow without having that burden on their overhead.
Thank you all for your participation.